My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you didn't just change my life. It shattered the very foundation of my world. The funeral for my husband, Robert, was the quietest day of my existence. Standing there beside his grave in the cold Ohio dirt, the world felt muted, gray. It was in that profound silence that my phone vibrated, a single jarring pulse against the hollow ache in my chest, a message from an unknown number. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My heart stopped. The letters swam before my eyes, surreal and mocking. I thought I was losing my mind, that grief had finally fractured my sanity. My hands trembled so violently I could barely type a reply. "Who are you?" The response came instantly, each word a hammer blow to my soul. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment tore my world in two. My gaze lifted from the screen and found my boys, Garrett and Logan, standing by the polished mahogany casket. Their expressions were strangely calm, their grief a performance. Something was deeply, horrifically wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as ice. For 42 years, Bob had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. And in that instant, I realized I might have lost him long before he was lowered into the ground at the hands of the two people we brought into this world. If you find this story as unbelievable as I did at that moment, please let me know in the comments below. Your support through a simple like or a subscription to Auntie Carol Tells Stories gives voices like mine a place to be heard. Now, let me tell you how it all began. I met Robert Vance when I was 24, right here in the small town of Willow Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I was working part-time at the local diner to support my sick mother, while Bob was fixing engines in a small auto repair shop he inherited from his father. We were poor, but we had something money could never buy, a true, unshakable love. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded blue dress, and he stepped out of his shop, hands stained with grease, and offered me a shy smile that made my heart flutter. "Morning, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice soft. "Your car sounding okay?" I didn't even own a car back then, but I made up an excuse just to talk to him. That first conversation turned into dates under the big old oak tree in Town Square Park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally into a simple wedding full of hope. The first few years were a struggle. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof that leaked every time it rained. We'd set out pots and pans to catch the drips, laughing about our indoor water features, but we were blissfully happy. Bob worked from sunup to sundown in his shop, the smell of motor oil clinging to him like a second skin. I took in sewing work, mending clothes for the women in town. When Garrett was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby, with his father's deep brown eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Logan arrived, just as perfect. I raised them with every ounce of love I possessed, sacrificing my own needs for theirs without a second thought. Bob was a wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in the creek on Sundays, teach them how to change a tire, and tell them stories about knights and dragons before bed. We were a close-knit family, a fortress of love, or so I believed. As they grew up, things started to change. Garrett, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a fancy car like some families in the city. Logan, ever the follower, echoed his brother's sentiments. When Garrett turned 18, Bob offered him a place at the shop, a chance to learn the trade, and one day take over. Garrett rejected it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," he'd said. The words sharp and cruel. "I'm going to be someone important." Those words wounded Bob deeply, though he tried not to show it. I'd see him sometimes, sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a profound sadness in his eyes. His son hadn't just rejected his work, he'd rejected his entire way of life. Years passed, and to my surprise, Garrett made a name for himself in the cutthroat world of Chicago finance. Logan soon followed, getting into tech startups. They both started making money, far more than Bob and I had ever seen in our lifetimes. At first, I was so proud. My sons had escaped the cycle of poverty and built better lives, but that pride slowly curdled into sorrow. Their visits became less frequent, their phone calls shorter, more perfunctory. When they did come home, they arrived in expensive German cars, wearing tailored suits, talking about stock portfolios and real estate investments. They'd look at our humble home, the place where they took their first steps, with a strange mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," Garrett said during one of their sporadic visits, "you and Dad should really move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right in a way. The paint was peeling and the floorboards creaked, but that house held all our memories. It was our sanctuary. It was our home. Bob, ever the wise one, would tell me, "Eleanor, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I made excuses for their absences, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I'd tell myself. But in my heart, I knew Bob was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't realize to what extent. The most drastic change came when Garrett married Tiffany Sterling. She was a woman from the city who never bothered to hide her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her to Willow Creek, she teetered up our gravel driveway in stilettos, dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than our mortgage payment. "So nice to meet you," she said, her smile tight as she barely extended her fingertips for a handshake. Her eyes scanned our cozy living room with an expression of clinical horror. During dinner, she barely touched the pot roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing, the one that used to be Garrett's favorite. She just pushed the food around her plate. Garrett seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he'd never been ashamed of before. "Next time, we'll take them out to a real restaurant," he whispered to Tiffany, thinking I couldn't hear. Every word was a knife in my heart. Logan, for his part, remained single, but adopted the same distant, dismissive attitude as his brother. His visits were brief, always punctuated by urgent business calls. Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. They'd bring extravagant gifts we didn't need. A smart TV we didn't know how to use, a cashmere blanket I was afraid to touch. They'd stay for a few hours, the relief on their faces palpable when they finally left. Bob and I grew old together, alone, comforting each other. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands were no longer as steady. I continued with my sewing, though my eyes weren't as sharp. "You know what the saddest part is, Eleanor?" Bob said to me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money. It's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore. He was right, as always. We were an uncomfortable reminder of a past they wanted to erase. Things got worse when Garrett and Tiffany bought a $1 million house in an exclusive Chicago suburb. Logan bought a luxury condo downtown for nearly as much. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even comprehend. You should sell this house and move into an assisted living facility, Tiffany suggested during one of her rare visits, her tone dripping with false concern. There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable. The words hit me like a slap. An assisted living facility. After 42 years of building our home, after raising these sons with so much love, they wanted to put us away. We don't need to be put away, Bob replied, his voice firm with the quiet dignity that always defined him. We're fine here, in our home. But I saw the look on my sons' faces. They supported Tiffany's idea. To them, we were a problem to be solved in the most convenient way possible. It was then that the direct pressure began. Garrett arrived one day with a folder full of papers. Dad, Mom, he said with that practiced, insincere smile, I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth maybe $100,000 tops. If you sell it, I can add some money from my investments and you can move somewhere really nice. A nicer place. To us, there was no place nicer than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Garrett didn't understand that. For him, everything was a transaction. Besides, look, Garrett said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, Tiffany and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house, that money could be an early inheritance. An early inheritance. He was asking for our money while we were still alive. The audacity left me speechless. Bob remained calm, but I saw his jaw tense. Son, when your mother and I are gone, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our decisions are our own. Don't be so stubborn, Logan cut in, with a harshness I'd never heard from him before. You're old. You can't keep living in the past. That night, after they left, Bob and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time, we confronted the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. Something's wrong, Eleanor, my husband said, his eyes filled with a worry I'd never seen before. This isn't just ambition. There's something darker behind all this pressure. I had no idea how profoundly right he was. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were orchestrating a plan that would end in tragedy. The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Bob had left early for the shop, same as he had every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang. Mrs. Vance? A stranger's voice asked. I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The world dissolved into a blur. My neighbor, Susan, had to drive me. I was shaking too much to even hold the car keys. When we got to the hospital, Garrett and Logan were already there. That struck me as odd. I was his emergency contact. The hospital had called me first. How did they know? But in my desperation, the question was quickly buried. Mom, Garrett said, hugging me with a force that felt rehearsed. Dad's in bad shape. The doctors say a compressor exploded at the shop. He has severe burns and a head injury. Logan's eyes were red, but his expression was more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for a verdict rather than grieving for his father. When I entered that ICU room, my heart shattered. Bob was hooked up to a dozen machines, bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. I took his hand, the only part of him that seemed untouched. "Bob, my love," I whispered, "I'm here." "You're going to be okay." For a fleeting moment, I felt a slight squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to come back to me. The next 3 days were a living hell. I lived at the hospital, sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. Garrett and Logan took turns staying with me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors about logistics than in comforting their dying father. I overheard fragmented conversations about medical insurance, about the cost of treatment, about life insurance policies. "Mom," Garrett said to me on the second day, his tone disturbingly practical, "we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more." Why was he talking about money when Bob was fighting for his life? "I don't care about the money," I snapped. "I just want your father to get better." On the third day, the doctors gave us the devastating news. Dr. Evans, a kind man with tired eyes, told us Bob's condition was critical. The head trauma was more severe than they'd thought. He was in an induced coma, and it was highly unlikely he would ever regain consciousness. My world caved in. "We want to try everything," I sobbed, "no matter the cost." But Garrett and Logan exchanged a look that unsettled me to my core. "Mom," Garrett said, his voice a calculated imitation of sympathy, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden." A burden? My husband, their father, was a burden. The fury that rose in me was primal. "He is your father," I screamed. "He's the man who raised you." "We know, Mom," Logan chimed in, "but the medical bills will be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings." Again, money. It was always about the money. That night, alone in the hospital room, I held Bob's hand and talked to him. I told him I couldn't let him go, and then it happened again. His fingers moved, a faint but definite squeeze. His lips moved as if trying to form words, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses, desperate. "He's reacting." But by the time they arrived, Bob was still again. "Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am," the nurse said gently. "It doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew what I had felt. Bob had tried to tell me something. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the alarms on his machines blared. Nurses rushed in. They worked for 40 minutes, but it was useless. At 4:37 a.m., Robert Vance was officially declared dead. The pain was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. Garrett and Logan arrived an hour later. They seemed prepared, carrying papers and phone numbers for funeral homes. "We already talked to the Willow Creek Funeral Home," Garrett said, while I was still crying inconsolably. "We also contacted the insurance company," Logan added. "The claim process is already underway." How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold? The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Garrett handled all the arrangements, choosing the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it over with. The funeral itself was strangely empty. A few neighbors, Susan, me, and the pastor. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Garrett. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. "Dad was a private person." That was a lie. Bob loved his community. As the pastor spoke hollow words about eternal rest, I watched my sons. Garrett kept glancing at his watch. Logan seemed restless. Tiffany was discreetly checking her phone behind her black veil. It was as the first handful of dirt hit the casket, a sound so final and hopeless that my phone vibrated with that first life-altering message, "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." And then the second, "Don't trust our sons." That night, alone in my house that now felt like a tomb, I replayed every detail. Bob's accident, the quick arrival of my sons, their obsession with insurance. I went to Bob's old wooden desk and found his metal box of important documents. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy Garrett had mentioned. But there was a detail I hadn't known. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from a mere $5,000 to $50,000. Bob had never mentioned this. I kept digging and found something even more disturbing: the workers' comp policy, purchased just 2 months before his death. A total of $125,000. A fortune for us, but also a motive for someone without a conscience. My phone vibrated again, the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. The next day, I went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who'd known us for 30 years, greeted me with sincere condolences. When she showed me the bank statements, my blood ran cold. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals totaling nearly $10,000 had been made from our savings account. "Who authorized these?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your husband came in person," she explained. "He said he needed the money for new equipment at the shop." But I knew that wasn't true. I handled our finances. Bob would have told me. "Was he alone?" I pressed. Mrs. Thompson thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I think one of your sons was with him a couple of times. Garrett, I believe. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Bob had trouble reading the fine print without his glasses." Garrett, using his father's failing eyesight as an excuse to drain our savings. That afternoon, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Bob he needed more protection for you. It was a trap I could no longer deny the evidence. The next day, I drove to Bob's shop. Garrett had told me a compressor exploded, but when I got there, the place was pristine, too clean. There were no burn marks, no debris, no signs of destruction. The large air compressor stood in the corner, perfectly intact. What, then, had caused the accident? In Bob's desk, tucked away in a ledger, I found what I was looking for. A small notebook with his familiar handwriting, a note dated 3 days before his death. Garrett insists I need more insurance. Says it's for Eleanor, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that, another. Logan brought some papers to sign. Says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand the details. Why all the hurry? My husband had known. He had sensed the danger. Tucked inside the back cover of the notebook was a sealed envelope with my name on it. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was a letter from Bob. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Garrett and Logan. They're too interested in our money. Yesterday, Garrett told me I should be more concerned about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Eleanor. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly." Not even our sons. The letter fell from my hands. Bob had seen his own death coming. That evening, I got the proof I needed. I went to the local police station and spoke to Sergeant Davis, a man who had known Bob for years. "The report on your husband's accident," he asked, looking confused. "What accident, Mrs. Vance?" "From his shop," I said. "When the compressor exploded." The sergeant checked his files and shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Bob's shop. In fact, we have no report of any work accident involving your husband." My world tilted on its axis. "But my son said that's why he was in the hospital." Sergeant Davis pulled up another file. "Mrs. Vance, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the initial medical report, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of acute poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood." The sergeant continued grimly. "A quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you." "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. He sighed. "The immediate family who signed the hospital paperwork, your sons, requested that the information be kept confidential. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. They had hidden the truth. They had invented the story of the explosion to cover up a murder. I had more than suspicions now. I was certain. That afternoon, Logan came to the house with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as his brother. "How are you, Mom?" "You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, observing him. "Just thinking." "That's good," he said. "Garrett and I think you should sell the house soon. Old houses lose value quickly." "Logan," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." Panic flashed in his eyes just for a second before he masked it. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "The grief is getting to you." He got up abruptly, spilling his coffee. "I think you need to rest." He left quickly, but not before making an urgent, hushed phone call from the porch. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The prediction came true. The next day, Garrett and Logan arrived together with Tiffany in tow. They carried a bag of pastries from the fancy bakery downtown. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Garrett began. "Tiffany brought your favorite pastries, and we made that special coffee you like so much." I remembered the message. Don't eat or drink anything. Were they planning to poison me too? "Thank you, but I've already had breakfast," I said firmly. Garrett exchanged a significant look with Logan, the same look they'd shared at the hospital. "Mom," he said, sitting closer, "we've been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior. The strange questions, the visits to the police. It's a normal part of grief, but it can be dangerous." "We spoke to a Dr. Albright," Logan added gravely. "He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner." Paranoia. They were calling me crazy for uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said. "I'm just asking the questions I should have asked from the beginning, like why there's no police report for your father's accident, or why you withdrew $10,000 from our savings account." A deafening silence fell over the room. Their faces were masks of thinly disguised panic. "Those things have simple explanations," Garrett finally stammered. "Dad withdrew that money for a surprise for you. He was going to remodel the kitchen. More lies. And the police report isn't always necessary for accidents on private property. Mom, Tiffany intervened, her voice sickeningly sweet. We just want to take care of you. That's why we think it would be best if you move to a place with specialized medical attention. A specialized care home, Garrett corrected, for people going through complicated grief. And in the meantime, Logan added, we can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated things. There it was, the complete plan. Declare me mentally incompetent, put me in a home, and take everything. And if I refuse, I asked, the masks began to crack. All right, Garrett said, standing up abruptly. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures. We can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have a preliminary report from Dr. Albright based on our descriptions of your behavior. It was a direct threat. Hand over the money, or they would use the legal system to steal it. I need time to think, I said, buying time. Of course, Tiffany said with her false sweetness, but not too much time. For your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear, my own sons. That night, my phone vibrated one last time. Eleanor, this is Detective Miles Corbin. I'm a private investigator. Bob hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Garrett and Logan. They poisoned him with methanol mixed in his morning coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, at the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll be there at last. The mysterious messenger had a name, and he had the proof I needed to get justice for my husband. The war had just begun, and they were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day, I dressed carefully, choosing the simple navy blue dress I wore for important occasions. At 2:30, I walked to the corner cafe. Every shadow felt menacing. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited. At 3 o'clock sharp, a tall, gray-haired man with intelligent eyes approached my table. Mrs. Vance? He asked in a low voice. I'm Miles Corbin. I'm so sorry for your loss. Bob was a good man. He opened a folder and took out a small voice recorder. Bob came to see me a month ago, he said. He hired me to investigate his sons discreetly. He pressed play. Bob's voice filled the space between us, so familiar it made me ache. Miles, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Garrett and Logan have been pressuring me. There are clauses in the insurance papers that directly benefit them. Corbin played another recording, this time of Garrett on the phone. No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is getting suspicious. Yes, I already have the methanol. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated we can do whatever we want with her. Tears streamed down my face. My son, planning his father's murder. There's more, Corbin said softly. He played a recording from the day before Bob's death. It was Logan. Everything's ready. Tomorrow, Garrett is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a new vitamin supplement. The idiot will drink it without suspecting a thing. My world completely collapsed. How did you get these? I sobbed. Bob asked me to place listening devices in your house, Corbin explained. He was afraid. He then showed me photographs of Garrett buying methanol at a hardware store 30 miles away. He showed me their financial records. Garrett owed over $70,000 to a loan shark in Chicago. Logan had gambling debts of $40,000. They were desperate. "Why didn't you go to the police sooner?" I asked. "Because they bribed the doctor who attended to Bob to change the official diagnosis. The death certificate says heart failure. Without medical evidence, my recordings might not have been enough." Finally, he played the last recording. It was Garrett and Logan together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Garrett's voice said. "We can make it look like a suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it. And the money, everything would be ours." I stood up from the table, a new determination hardening inside me. "Then we have to act." That night, Corbin and I went directly to Sergeant Davis. For the next 2 hours, we laid out all the evidence, the recordings, the photographs, the bank documents, and a full medical exam Bob had taken just a week before his death, showing he was in perfect health. Sergeant Davis listened, his expression growing grimmer with each piece of evidence. "This is monstrous," he murmured. He immediately called the district attorney, who came to the station personally. Arrest warrants were issued for Charles and Henry. The exhumation of Bob's body was authorized. At 6 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. It was Garrett. "Mom, you need to come to Logan's house right away. Something terrible has happened. It was a trap. I knew they were moving up their timeline to get rid of me." "I'm on my way," I lied. An hour later, I watched from my window as police cars swarmed my son's expensive homes. At 9 a.m., Sergeant Davis was at my door. "Mrs. Vance, we have arrested Garrett and Logan. They are in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." The trial was a sensation. The courtroom was packed. When my sons were led in, wearing orange prison jumpsuits, my heart broke all over again, but I felt no pity. The prosecutor was devastating. The recordings were played for the jury. A gasp of horror swept through the courtroom when they heard the plan to murder me. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at my sons. "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I never imagined that the love and sacrifice we gave them would become the reason for their father's murder." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. The verdict was guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice for Bob. After the trial, Tiffany came to see me, pleading and crying. "We're family," she screamed. "The family died the day you all decided to kill Bob for money," I replied coldly and closed the door. A week later, I received a letter. It was from Garrett. "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am so sorry. The money, the debts, they blinded us. I can't live with what we did." The next day, he was found hanging in his cell. When Logan learned of his brother's death, he suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison's psychiatric hospital. Today, 5 years later, I live peacefully in my small house. I donated all the insurance money to establish the Robert Vance Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. Bob's old auto shop is now a beautiful garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Detective Corbin has become a dear friend. Sometimes people ask if I miss my sons. I miss the children they once were. The men they became were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. Justice didn't bring Bob back, but it gave me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together. I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing everything.